What's up, and welcome to Product Parade, where we talk about all sorts of incredible products, including tech products. And today we have a very special episode where we will be talking with Kurt Fulepp, who is the president of digital at AccuWeather. AccuWeather is a massive company with an incredible mobile app. Thank you so much for being here, and we really hope you enjoy the show. If you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave them down in the comment section below. Thank you for coming out to the show today, Kurt. So excited to have you. And for those of you that don't know, Kurt was my first real CPO. And so I got I earned a lot of stripes in product management under Kurt. So he is an incredible leader. Unfortunately, I don't work with him as often anymore, but super grateful to have you on the show, Kurt. And I wanted to dive into your current role and responsibility right now.
And it's great to be here, Dallin, and nice to see you. And as you mentioned, so I've been at AccuWeather now for the past 5.5 years. I started as the Chief Product Officer overseeing all our product management and our product design. About 18 months ago, I moved into the role of President of Digital. So what does that mean? Essentially took the product organization and now oversee all of our sort of like digital business. So that expanded out to some of our software development, some of our growth marketing efforts, overseeing sort of the business and the revenue drivers and the P&L, and really taking sort of product at the center of the business. And I think that's sort of been, I'm sure as we talk today, a big central theme of being the CEO of the product, really evolving from Chief Product Officer into the person leading everything that is our digital organization for both our consumers and our business customers.
Mm-hmm. And first of all, congratulations on your promotion. I know that when you first came in, I was a part of that very early team where there really wasn't a product culture, and you came in and you really built truly a product culture, which I've now gone other places that didn't have a true product culture, and I've tried to bring it myself. And that's a real particular skill to be able to bring in a product culture to a company that doesn't have or hasn't ever had true product managers before. And I did want to ask you, how did you do that? Like how were you able to go in and say, not only am I establishing a product culture, but now I'm going to become president of digital in the future and really drive this massive company in a major way?
Yeah, look, I think that's the first part is you don't change a company culture if the company is not ready to change, right? And I think that that's half the battle is identifying teams or opportunities as a product manager or product leader on, is the company ready to pivot from being whatever front foot is first to being product first, and really putting the product that you deliver in sort of the front end sense of and in our cases websites, apps, and other products and services to be really product led. And I think that being able to change the culture starts with, is the company ready to embrace sort of that mindset of, we're going to start everything from the product that we build and the consumers that we serve. And when I came in, that was really my mandate. I was incredibly excited to join an organization with such a core mission of saving lives and protecting property on data that matters to every single person. I mean, I don't think there's any conversation during the day that you don't talk about weather, or somebody talks about something that's caused by weather happening in the weather. So when you have an organization that firstly has a service and an offering, and the product itself, the weather data, which is the best in the world, coupled with the desire to let's build products that everybody will love and use on a consistent daily basis, that gives you the opening as a product leader to go, great, I'm now going to start putting some frameworks, some different thinking, build out different sort of skill sets and teams organizationally in order to sort of realize the opportunity that's being given to you. And I think for me, that was sort of the reason I joined the company was the product itself being our core weather offering, our mission, and our place in the world. The brand, everybody knows AccuWeather, and I think for me that was incredibly exciting and compelling. And then also just organizationally, everybody wanted to get behind this. Let's start by building beautiful world-class product experiences for apps and websites, and build our organization around that mindset. And then it sort of takes the step of, okay, well, what do you need to do that? And I think that was sort of why you joined on the journey, for example, is finding product managers and leaders and designers and other folks who bring a variety of experiences to the table. When you're building a product that's in the hands of tens of millions of users every day, you need to make sure that you have diverse thinking, you have different backgrounds, you're thinking about even ecosystems. We always laugh. I would argue that I'm just such an iOS biased person that I need to make sure that I surround myself with my Android evangelists, because I only own the Apple world, and that diversity in itself is super important. So I think for me, it's finding in order to create a culture, you also have to have a willingness to accept the culture, versus trying to force through something that the organization or the teams might not be ready for.
Yeah, and I actually feel like, on a side note, one of my X factors I thought when I joined the team is, at the time I was a heavy Android user. So I had been iOS and I switched to Android. And I remember when Matt found out that I was, using Android, he was like super happy about it because everyone else on the team was strictly iOS. So I was like, it's kind of a funny X factor that I had at the time. But
it's still such an important part, and we've got our Android power users, and I know, and the irony is Android has a larger global user base, of course, right? So it does reinforce, as a product manager, you got to escape your bubble, because you're building products for obviously different platforms, different preferences, different user profiles, and I think that's sort of as a product manager, the first thing you have to do is you have to always take a step back from your own personal biases and your own use cases, and you should scrap from your vocabulary or vernacular of I think, because while your instincts and guts are great, a gut feel is always important as a PM. It's what your users think. What are your users telling you versus what you as an individual thinks as well.
Yeah, and you're touching on something else that I know we wanted to talk about, which is top characteristics, and like characteristic traits that PM, like product managers have, but also PM leaders. And I think it's a little bit different, but I wanted to ask you your thoughts on what are some of those top characteristic traits.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, I think my light just went out. That's why I had this dramatic fade. So we'll see how that goes. But I think the main characteristics that I look for is influence and being able to sort of drive consensus. And I talk to a lot of folks who join. They want to be a product manager to be the CEO of a product. And that term is kicked around all the time, that if you're a product manager, you're the CEO of the product, and what does that mean? And I always start by saying, well, the CEO is the CEO, and you're not. You have to so you don't have the span of control because you're not the CEO. And that means that you have to have the ability to inspire, you have to have vision, you have to have influence, and you have to also be strategic and operational. And being the product manager is sort of like being a gymnast in terms of expertise, is that you have to know enough of everything. You have to be able to be on a daily basis in the weeds. You also have to be the person looking over the horizon. And there's very few jobs that I find that actually require that flexibility and nimble nature of a day-to-day, that you could be going from a scrum thinking about what's happening for the next 2 weeks to walking into a presentation to give a vision for the next 3 years. And that's sort of I think the defining skill of a product manager is that you have to have the ability to synthesize long-term and short-term needs for your team, and then reflect it in a way that a designer or a developer or a salesperson or a customer service lead can understand how the product itself fits into their organizational world.
And that's, I mean, I love that. That's influence outside without necessarily authority. And I'm also curious to hear more about when you do have authority. So when you actually run a product organization and you have a director of product that reports to you, who has multiple product managers who report to them, how does that sphere of authority and influence change when you're trying to drive not just the product team, but really the the company, how the company views and interacts with the product team as a whole.
Yeah, look, I think it's funny. And I don't know, you've worked with me before, so you can also fact check me on this statement that it's not that I'm not just saying what I think would be the right thing to say. I do think the challenge with product is you can have the balance of I can make the decision to move, or I can bring everybody on the journey with me. And I think where at least what feels natural to me as a leader and the DNA that I try to bring to product is obviously I could make the decision on where the product roadmap is heading, but I don't think your powers of influence or persuasion ever stop. And your job is to make sure that everybody feels that they're buying into the vision of where you're moving from. And I think that goes back to what we started and talked about being a product-led company. That doesn't mean decision company. That just simply means that the product is what leads the strategy, and every team buys into that strategy, and then you collectively move it on. And I think that that's sort of what has been the success of, at least just across industry-wide in product, is you can make a decision and move, but whether it's sort of an internal team from a technologist to a salesperson, if they aren't buying into the vision, the decision actually doesn't matter because you're not going to be successful as a team. So I think your job as you go up the rungs of product leadership is there is obviously decisions need to be made. I'm not skirting around that. At the end of the day, the PM is the person who has to decide what goes into a sprint, what's going into a feature set, what are we delivering to market. But that decisioning can't be done in isolation away from everybody else feeling like this is what we believe in, this is what we buy into, and this is what we're going for. And I think that's the line that I would sort of say for me is to cross. I spend more time evangelizing or politicking, whatever sort of word you think describes the getting people on board, as much as deciding and prioritizing and agreeing and moving with the team. And I think the hardest decision that a product manager has to make is no, and decide what doesn't fall in. You don't over-index on the that's it. Like giving people this feature that they want or the priority that they want. That's the easy part of the product manager job. Is like taking a whole lot of good ideas and ordering them. The hard part is saying, we're not doing this, and here's why. And spending time on the communication around this is why this particular feature or request is not being addressed, or prioritizing as this doesn't hit our North Star goal, this doesn't align to the vision, and then making sure that that person or that team doesn't feel that they've been excluded from the process, because then again, you undermine the product sort of like led organization because people are not buying into where you're taking it.
And one of the hardest lessons that I learned in product, and I'm still learning, is exactly what you mentioned, which is to like the politicking and bringing people along for the journey. And I think that that's definitely one of the hardest things that I've had to learn. And as I've managed younger PMs or more junior PMs, I realized that that gets overlooked tremendously, where like they're great at writing requirements and working with developers and working with designers, but then getting company buy-in to understand why we're working on something at a particular time, it's a completely different beast. And I was curious, what is one of the hardest lessons that you have like learned throughout your product journey, and what are some key takeaways that you have developed from that?
Yeah, so I got a couple. So before AccuWeather, I was at Timing, and I was the GM of digital across the news and business portfolio, overseeing product as one of the many rungs. And then before that, I worked at AOL as the VP and head of product across a variety of brands. So you can sort of see my career is also like sort of oscillated between product leader into a GM that oversees product and other functions. And AccuWeather has kind of been that same journey of chief product into president of digital, which I think is actually the sign of companies that prioritize product, that your product is your business. And we can obviously spend a lot of time talking about sort of what DNA that exhibits. But the lessons are, one is drumbeat. Your job, like there is no one internally who is going to sort of create that sort of momentum of a product if it's not the product manager. And the lesson I learned early in my career at AOL was very much a, what is that drumbeat? What are we sort of talking about internally and externally, and pulling myself out of the day-to-day weeds of delivery and execution. And sometimes as a PM, and I talk to a lot of team members and about it, is your job is also to explain what's going on. And I know that might feel like busy work, if you want to call it that way, and you're stepping away from your actual core team of execution. But if you're not talking about what the team is doing, a lot of work is not going to be understood. A lot of opportunity to get consensus and buy-in is not going to be there. You're also not going to generate that excitement. And I counsel product managers all the time, step out of the day-to-day and focus on being your own publicist. And what is that drumbeat? What are you doing? Why does it matter? What did the team achieve? And taking it out of that sort of core day-to-day product team of engineers and designers and the other sort of like supporting teams, and operate at that 50,000-foot view in the company so people know what's happening. The second lesson I learned on the other side was, so lesson one is drumbeat. It's like momentum, drumbeat, and talk about what you're doing. Second one is nixing things before they go too far. You might have the best consumer insight. You might have the best product idea that tests really well. Don't overcook your MVP and get it into market and get into the hands of users. And I would say that at AOL, we were trying to build one of the products that I was working on, was a phenomenal series that still exists. It's called makers.com. It was a chronicle of just incredible stories of women who have done extraordinary things across the spectrum of household names to people that you've never heard of. And I always sort of give the examples of, on the one hand, you have Oprah. On the other, you have this incredible person named Brenda Berkman, who was the first female firefighter in New York City. And we were creating this catalog of stories to chronicle, how did you sort of be the first, or how did you be this trailblazer in your field? And for me, it was building a product alongside a filmmaking team, sharing the stories, creating bite-sized videos and whatnot. Anyway, that was like, we kept adding to the collection, and we made a long-form documentary. We heard a lot from our consumers that we would love to tell stories of people and women in our lives, whether it was fathers who wanted to tell their daughter's story, whether someone wanted to tell their teacher's story, they wanted to catalog what their parents or their grandmother thought. And we thought, great, let's build a filmmaking app, and let's give our audience the opportunity to have title cards and have like questions and sort of like build up to make your own story. And as a product manager, I was like, this is awesome. This is so much fun. But we missed the insight that we overcooked what we delivered to our users. That was too complicated. At the end of the day, our audience wanted a place in which they could record and post and share and build community, not become a Hollywood filmmaker. Yeah. So ironically, we went too far down in the production of the product before I got it into the hands of consumers, and then realized I had to actually unwind it because the complexity was not necessary for what our audience wanted at the time. And hugely successful when we actually de-scoped the MVP. So my lesson at that time was, don't push the ball too far before your audience actually gets a hold of it, because our insight was correct, our audience was craving, our success was there, but we didn't need to go as sophisticated. And I would say that we probably lost a quarter of getting the product into market at the time, versus if we just essentially tested the MVP at a true MVP stage.
Yeah, there's always that price you pay. And the thing that I was thinking about while you're talking is, the more experience you get as a PM, the more technical you become. And even though you may not think of yourself, like I don't think of myself as a technical product manager, but after years and years of working side by side with developers and designers, you end up learning a lot of technicalities. And when you're evangelizing inside the company or talking to users, you may think, hey, like I'm gonna, like what we're doing, it should be obvious. Like this is very clear what we're trying to do. The solution seems very clear, but it could be actually very technical, and it's going right over people's heads. So it's hard for them to get buy-in. Or once you work on the product, you went too far and you build up too many technical features that once it hits the general population, they're like, I don't know what to do. So you kind of have to keep that in check of look, how technical am I getting as a product manager? And am I truly understanding the user? And am I thinking on that level? Or am I thinking on this other level because I've been in hour-long brainstorms for the past few weeks with a lead developer that's like incredibly genius and brilliant, but now you're just thinking, it's interesting how technicalities and your technical skills can start getting in the way to some degree when it comes to some of these soft skills that you need.
Yeah, I think that that's so one of the other parts that I've always everyone asks, like, know enough to be dangerous is kind of my also like mantra in product. Like, know enough technology to be dangerous in a scrum meeting, or know enough design to be dangerous in order to have actually really good feedback. It doesn't need, and I think you touched on a really important like skill as a product manager is you don't need to be able to write code, but you need to have enough of an understanding so that when you're briefing your developers, you actually build credibility that you know what is feasible and what is not. The same as you've got to know enough about sort of like design and interaction and information hierarchy in order to have a good fluid conversation with your design team. And I think like that's sort of the balance of being the jack of all trades as a product manager is your craft actually requires you to be really flexible in what is your core skill set. And we often talk about again, another lesson that I think's been key to mind is know your blind spot. And there's really sort of most product managers have to understand the business. They have to understand UX. And when I say UX, it's not just sort of wireframing and whatnot. I sort of use that broadly of what's the user experience going to be? What is sort of from the design to just the fidelity of the product, and then also the technology. And you're probably never going to be good at all three. If somebody says, I'm an expert at all three, we may want to have sort of a polite conversation about usually a unicorn is fictional, right? Because there might be the occasional person who does. But you're probably index a little more to the business, index a little bit more to design and UX, or index a little bit more to technology. Know where your strengths are and supplement yourself where it's not. I'm very self-aware. My strength is business. I like to think I'm very design-oriented. I'm a little more technical than when I started, but I still surround myself with product managers like yourself who can actually supplement my sort of like technical gaps. And that's because my education was business schooling. I sort of came into product, and when product, what is product management? Anyone can be a product manager. I was sort of in that sort of like very vague open field at the start. But being aware with yourself of this is my strength and this is where I need to supplement, and put really smart, incredible teammates into those areas that you feel like might be an area that is your blind spot. And I think that I often say if you're a product manager thinking about stepping into your first job, being self-aware and actually communicating that is a really admirable thing. I often talk to product managers like, I can do it all. And I'm like, no, you can't. Tell me what you can't do. That's not a reason not to get the job. I just be self-aware.
And you mentioned education, and
Yes.
I think that you have a great background. So I want to hear more about your background because it's unique as well, especially for people in the US, because you studied outside of the US. And also, you teach, so you teach at a university in New York. So I'd love to hear more about your background and what you're doing right now from the educational standpoint of teaching new upcoming graduate students or people interested in product management.
Yes. So I'll start with what I'm teaching. So I teach at Columbia University in New York at Columbia Business School. I'm incredibly proud that we as a school launched a full semester product management elective and a product management lab for MBA students and some engineering students who want to pursue a career in product management. And I think that it's a primer for you've got really strong business engineering acumen, but you want to understand and take a step into what is it to be a product manager. And over 12 weeks, we go through the journey of the foundations of what is product management. How do you sort of interface with various teams across the organization? How do you build, ship, and deliver products? And then also really on the technical and the design foundations in order to make sure that you've got the currency in order to be able to have those conversations with the teams that you're going to be super dependent on. And a lot of the times, it's a pivot in someone's career. Working from maybe consulting or engineering or being in a marketing function, and a pivot to becoming a product manager, or just curiosity in order to interact with product managers in a more sort of in a more elegant and insightful way. So that's sort of been a whole lot of fun. We've been teaching that for 2 semesters, about to go into the third, I think, more broadly, a recognition that product management is now a discipline to teach. Because when I started, there was no discipline. There was really no educational pathing. It was much more on the job experience and trying to figure it out along the way. And I'm probably dating myself now. So, I think it's sort of, and let's be generous. The last 5 years, the recognition that product is actually a discipline that you could say, I'm going to go and be a product manager, start your career, and choose an education that helps align to that goal.
And you have been teaching at Columbia for more than just a few semesters. So I guess because that's a very cool transition, and I agree, because I used to hear everybody at MBA school, like a lot of people are going to look at it as a transition, but a lot of them are transitioning into finance, or maybe they're lawyers and they want to get into finance, like something that is maybe makes them more money or gives them a better lifestyle, at least in the long term. And now I'm hearing a lot of people are going to MBA school to become product managers, and they're leaving their finance background, or they're leaving their law background, which I think is, I mean, it was very surprising to me. So it's super cool to be able to say, hey, I've been teaching here at the business school for, I mean, you were teaching way back when.
So I was teaching at NYU, and which was and made the shift to Columbia when Columbia picked up the product management focus. But I think like you touch on like a really good point. I went to business school, but none of my classes were related to product. They were very much centered in marketing. And sort of where I'll connect the dots on how I got into my career and what I'm seeing about the pivot is having a really solid business foundation enables you to be the CEO of the product, but you're not the CEO. And I always say you're not the CEO because it's like, again, it infers if you're the CEO of the product, you're in control of everything. You're not. But you really are in control of everything through your influences we talked about before. And I think that by going through a business acumen, and it's certainly not the only way to get into product management, you get a really good understanding of sort of like insight-driven modeling decisions, really focusing on what makes the business tick, and building sort of like a broader understanding of, if product is the business, then how do you drive the business forward? Whether it's in your business casing, understanding how to build a model, understanding how to project different outcomes, whether it's understanding sort of audiences and segmentation, and thinking more about a user-centric approach. I think the MBA is a really good way of giving you that rounded business acumen that then you can apply into being the CEO of the product on a day-to-day basis. I went and thought I was going to be in marketing, and I started off in marketing. If over the last, I don't know, a few minutes that we've been talking, whether some of your audience have picked up, my accent is originally from Australia. I've been in New York now for nearly 15 years, but I think it's still there. But I was working actually at a joint venture between Microsoft and a very large media company. It's called 9MSN. And I was working on the television aspect in the marketing, in the marketing team. And then it was at the advent of putting a lot of long form, so videos and TV series and content on the internet. And I was able to make sort of a pivot into essentially being a marketer / product manager of online video content. And again, I'd never studied product management. I think I was reasonably technical enough and digitally savvy at the time to move into the role. And like any sort of early 20s individual would say, yes, I can do that. And you just sort of like fake it until you make it. But I think it was but marketing gave me a really good understanding of, I'm starting with a person, a user. I'm not starting with a product. I'm starting by serving somebody's needs and trying to fill that need with what I'm delivering. And again, that's sort of the thread that I would connect between studying an MBA, but also now having a product management program or elective within an MBA, is all the sort of core skills of thinking through your business, thinking through the model in which you're going to monetize, thinking the way in which you bring a product to market, thinking about the audience in which you serve, and then picking up the product skills from industry leaders and pretty much an adjunct faculty who can hopefully bring real life experiences, is sort of the evolution that I've seen over the when I did my business studies, right, to students now looking for sort of that product management component in the program. Because back then it was such an early form, I don't think you would have also had the real chance of speaking to professionals who've shipped and delivered digital products at scale. It was sort of a very early art of the industry.
And when I got started in product management, because I mean, I love that background, and I think you were one of the first CPOs that had like an MBA, and I know that's definitely not like true. I'm sure a bunch of others did as well, but I feel like back in the day, it wasn't as much of a requirement to have an MBA to be a CPO, and now I see more and more where I see like a head of product listing or chief product officers, many of them either require an MBA or they say like preferred MBA, or a lot of CPOs have an MBA. And I'm curious what you think the future of product will look like. Is that going to require to be a chief product officer? Is that going to require either one, a very successful product and like entrepreneurship experience where you're like, hey, I launched this product, I was a lead product person on it, it blew up, and then you can go to a pretty well-established company and be a CPO based on that experience, or you're going to have an MBA. Because I'm thinking about like the ladder up, and I'm like, okay, do I have to have an MBA in 5 to 10 years from now when I'm hoping to be a chief product officer and lead an organization?
Um, I'm actually going to say I don't think I hope that an MBA is not the requirement to be a chief product officer, and I'll give you the reason why. Is I think that an MBA is an incredible path to create the skills and experience that you need in order to be, I think, an effective product leader, and goes back to everything that we just talked about. But along the way, through experience, you can also pick up those type of skills, whether it's the delivery of information, power of persuasion, which is one spectrum that you have to deliver on, to also having a very sort of solid business acumen. I think you can pick it up a long way. The MBA is a great path to fill those opportunities if you haven't had the journey in order to pick it up as you go along. And I think that for me is the advice I would give is less about MBA or not, more about, again, going back to sort of the Venn diagram of business, tech, and UX. If you're strong in tech and UX, surrounding yourself with the business acumen. If you're strong at UX and business, the tech acumen, and being really self-aware on, as your journey and the way in which you've achieved your experience, what sort of gaps do you have, and how do you fill those voids? And I think but I think, as students in MBA programs now recognize that product is taking the front foot in a lot more product-led organizations. Therefore, whether you're the product manager or you're a sales leader or you're a marketing leader, you're going to have an understanding of the product organization. And I think that if you sort of, again, the stretching the evolution in time, why has product-led suddenly become sort of the favorite cliche of a lot of businesses is, I think product was previously seen as the project team. You give the product manager the task that they need. Someone else defines the user you serve. Somebody else defines the product that you're building, and then product got the ticket over the fence, or they got the requirement over the fence. Now it's very much like, product, please bring forward a solution to a problem. And I think that that's transparently where you're starting to see a lot of marketing organizations and product organizations start to overlap a little bit more deeply than they did in the past, because typically marketing would define the audience, define the use case, define where the business is going, and product would execute on that. Now there is a much tighter collaboration between those two teams, and if not, product taking a little step forward over into the definition phase as well. And I think that sort of is another theme that I think has seen the product discipline evolve and become a core part of educational programs and computer science programs and other sort of like educational streams, because product is a team that everybody is really dependent on nowadays.
And as a product leader, it's I'm curious to know more on your thoughts about how do you come up with that solution? Because in some ways you want to be able to empower the product managers and say, "Hey, look, here's the problem, bring a solution." But at the end of the day, it's kind of like your head is on the chopping block, you have the ultimate responsibility, but there's so many problems to be solved in a company, in an organization. So how do you balance that between you have to make sure that you are coming up with very good solutions to problems, uh, but you also want to empower your product managers to be ones coming to the table with great solutions?
It's the question of agency is, I think, always how do you give the product managers the agency or the license to make decisions, really immerse themselves in the business, but you as a business leader ensure that they're going along the right track. And I think the obligation when you're in product leadership is actually not to be prescriptive of the solution, but to be very clear on the problem and the objectives. And that's, if you as a leader, your obligation is to set a very clear North Star with a very sort of clear set of goals. And sort of build the KPIs around that, and then allow the experts who are managing the products and the features and the delivery to orient themselves against that goal. And I think that where I see where I see lack of agency or the ability to be autonomous or unclear roadmaps is, well, what is that North Star? What are the steps we need to achieve, or what are the milestones that we need to reach in order to achieve that North Star? And how are we as teams calibrating on, we're building this for this reason, we're doing X for Y outcome. And I think that for me is the difference between, as a leader, dictating, team, do this, versus team, this is where we're going, this is where I need to get to. Everything that you bring forward needs to ladder up to this North Star and fall under one of these three goals, and you're going to measure it in these three ways. And that sort of gives you the flexibility, that gives you clear alignment on where the team needs to go, but it gives you the flexibility to start as at the grassroots level of your organization, deliver against sort of like folks who are thinking about it 40 hours a week. I'm not thinking about every product, every feature, every second of the day for my 40 hours a week. I don't have time and I don't want to. But I do think about where we're going, what we need to achieve, what is our ideal outcomes, what are sort of the parameters in which we should operate. And obviously, all of those are up for discussion, but just being very transparent with the team on this is what we need to achieve, then it helps sort of like build a roadmap in all the various teams against that North Star goal. And it might sound, again, that might sound obvious, but I think that goes back to your earlier question. Why do I think an MBA plays an important role? That's really what you learn how to do, is sort of to build that vision and the planning against it, and the measurement of outcomes, and the forecasting and analysis, and the business modeling. And that gives you the right tools in order to give your team the clear direction that they crave.
Yeah, and I thought you did a very good job of that when I worked with you. And I think you're underplaying how much, like how involved you are in the product process and in every single product. And then you mentioned like, oh, I can't do that during 40 hours a week. And I'm like, there's no way Kurt only works 40 hours a week unless he's the most efficient human on earth. So I am curious, at the C-suite level, how on do you have to be? Let's say like 90% of the time. 90% of the time, or 80% of the year, are you working like 40, 50, 60, 70-hour weeks? What would you say is kind of the requirement to be a kick butt CPO?
I, I might not answer it in hours, because because that's a hard one, because it's a variable, but you're right. It's more than 40. It's also understanding what horizon you've got to be on. Don't get stuck, like, and I sort of use like feet, like, are you at 50 feet, 500 feet, 5,000 feet, or 50,000 feet? You've got to understand sort of like what horizon your team needs you on. I always say to the team that I'm going to let you be at sort of below 5,000 feet, but the moment you need me to swoop into 50 feet, I'm there to help you. And not get caught in the day-to-day operations, but be able to sort of like move between what's over the horizon and what's happening now, understand what you need to involve yourself with and what you don't. And I think that is the hard skill that, frankly, it's really hard to teach. It's hard to give a lesson or put a framework around. But it's really understand. You know, one of my early managers said, actually, it was hire hard, manage easy, and I thought it was actually one of the best sort of like descriptors of, in the hiring process, finding the skills and the people that, you know, when they're on your team, management is going to be a walk in the park, because you're empowering really talented people to move forward. And I think for me, it's creating a culture of, there is no penalty points for if you need help. A mistake is a learning opportunity. Just tell me it's happened. And I'm here to be your mentor and coach, but I'm also here to get out of the way so that you can play on the field and play, because that's what I hired you for. And I think that just finding that right balance of letting go, leaning in, giving agency and autonomy, but giving guidance and goals, being visible and present and approachable, but not being there that's intimidating, that the boss is around, and also being very deliberate with your language. You know, I think the thing that I've always said to everybody is just, you'll never be unsure at what I mean. If I don't like something, I will say I don't like something. If I ask a question, it's generally a question. There is sort of no, and I think you as a leader building the rapport with your team, that they understand your language is direct, it is clear, there is never anything more than what is being said, because then your team can calibrate on, does Kurt need to be involved? Does he not? Have I got the agency to go? Or do I need to run this up for approval? And I think that is where I go back to the horizon level as a CPO. To be effective is knowing when you need to be deep, but when you should be sort of like up in the air.
Yeah. And I want to kind of transition this to like our closing piece, but the hot topic right now, the hype around the world is about AI and ChatGPT. And I'm so curious to get your thoughts on how AI will change being a product manager.
It's something I'm trying to figure out every day. So I've committed to myself to every day playing with a different tool, a different model, seeing where it would work. And I think that it goes back to the at the moment, I've seen a lot of process improvements, right? As there is no way that there is still your element as a PM of your product instincts and understanding consumer behavior. You can't sort of supplant that. But thinking about the day-to-day tasks that give you the insights in order to make those decisions and those priorities and those trade-offs, I think is really impactful. Give a good example is you ran and launched our award-winning app. So I've been riding the Dallin product launch for the years since. But you remember the volume of the App Store. When you're a global product, global app, you've got consumers sharing feedback, things they like, things they don't like, things that are broken, things that could be augmented. ChatGPT and tooling has changed the world in which of being able to just essentially synthesize, digest, think through themes, cataloging. So as a PM, you can spend more time on the analysis versus the, dare I say, it's sort of like the back and forth churn of thinking that through. Or if you need some sort of like, if you want to digest some recent trends and research, how do you pull out the nuggets in order for you to sort of get a head start in thinking through? And I think what it's hopefully going to enable, at least in the short term, until we can start seeing how the tooling rolls out, take away to give you the opportunity to use your secret sauce of actually thinking through the problem at hand and thinking through what your audience needs versus like in the collation and synthesis and analysis stage. And I think for me, that's an immediate way in which product managers can be more effective and more efficient. Obviously as well, it's the difference you should, if you're using it for research purposes, making sure that you actually take it with a grain of salt, because I'm not sure if you read recently in the Times, the lawyer who used it for a legal brief, and the case literature was all sort of fictional and it was presented to the court. So it's always a telling reminder that we're not at a maturity where you can take facts as facts. But I do think the tooling around you being an expert of what your audiences and consumers are saying and using the tools in which to get to an analysis point versus the churn and work is a really immediate step that product managers could deploy today.
Yeah. Any cool tools that you're like, hey, these tools have been helping so far? I mean, I see a new tool posted to LinkedIn every single day, and I've tried a few, and I haven't found anything that I felt like, oh, this can help me for real. But I'm curious if you feel like you found anything mature enough that you're like, hey, this is currently helping the team.
I think we're kind of running through about a tooling of 20, and I'll actually put into the chat, and you can post a couple of links of the actual names themselves, but escape me at the moment. But we have been using, for example, audit like a lot around sort of the automated video. I think one of the challenges for us is scale around. We're in 200 plus markets and countries and languages, so we have to deliver our products at a global scale to a global audience. And we primarily create a lot of our content in English, like our video content. Our forecast information is translated through our APIs. Trying the tools in which how could we take a piece of content to serve and deliver for everybody. So that's been where I've been spending a lot of time. Or again, around sort of like that social listening and the App Store listening and the App Store optimization space. So I don't think nothing's perfect right now, but I think what I'm learning from it is much more around where is the world going, and what tools, where are they in their evolution of readiness, and are they purely alpha, are they actually an MVP, or are they pretty fully fledged? And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. I don't have a bucket of these are like ready and prime, but I do think that the improvements that are taking place. I read somewhere that ChatGPT as of today is like 6 months old or something, which blows my mind that the evolution is like it's been in our lives for 6 months, and it just keeps iterating. So I'm excited for what the next 6 months hold, and the ramp that these tools are going to go on.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, well, thank you so much for all of the nuggets. I knew that talking with you, there'd be just nuggets spread throughout the 45 minutes or however long we've been talking. So thank you for coming on the show, and I really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. It's great, and I would love to come back anytime. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're always welcome. You're always welcome.
Thank you.